Beneath the noise of victory parades and peace treaties, there are shadows that never lifted. In sealed rooms, the air still smells of oil, dust, and burned paper. Names are erased, but their fingerprints remain on steel and stone. What was hidden was never gone, only buried, waiting for the wrong hands or the right moment to surface. And when it does, the war will not feel as if it ever ended. On the night of April 23, 1945, a week before the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany, an unmarked freight train departed Gorlitz, Lower Silesia, under cover of darkness. It consisted of 11 cars, 7 heavy-gauge armored wagons, 3 flatbeds fitted with canvas covers, and a solitary passenger coach near the front. Railway logs later revealed the departure was authorized under Reich Ministry of Armaments Order No. 482B, signed personally by an adjutant to Albert Speer. The cargo manifest, partially recovered in the 1970s from a private collection in Dresden, lists each armored car only as containing Gerät v. Hochsitzer. Witnesses, all civilians pressed into service as railway laborers, recalled the peculiar nature of the escort. Approximately 40 SS personnel in field gray uniforms without insignia, equipped with suppressed MP-40 submachine guns and orders to keep a perimeter of 20 meters from the train at all times. Even Wehrmacht officers at Gorlitz station were denied access to the train. Locomotive engineer Karl-Heinz Müller, debriefed by Allied counterintelligence in June 1945, reported that the route had been altered at the last minute to avoid the Dresden-Prague main line. Instead, the train took a southwesterly diversion into the Sudeten highlands. Müller described one of the few stops en route, at a siding near the village of Cernavodă in the Bohemian forest, where a sealed canvas package was loaded aboard from a waiting Opel Blitz truck. The transfer occurred in near silence, under lantern light, and took less than 6 minutes. Local parish records indicate the presence of a Luftwaffe signals detachment in the area at the time, though no Luftwaffe reports from April 1945 mention Cernavodă. At 3:15 on April 25, British aerial reconnaissance photographed what appears to be the same train crossing a viaduct near Karlovy Vary. The photograph, declassified in 1984, is marked with a handwritten notation: possible Nachtfracht convoy, heavy guard, destination unknown. Allied tracking ended later that day when the train entered dense forest terrain south of Pilsen, where no mainline tracks officially existed. The trail picks up again, not in Europe, but in Soviet archives. In 1968, a defector from the GRU, identified only as V. Anichkov, claimed that in May 1945 the Red Army's 3rd Guards Tank Army intercepted a German train hidden in a forested rail spur near Hrastovce. According to his statement, Soviet engineers found large turbine assemblies wrapped in oiled cloth, bearing design plates from the BMW Flug Motorenbau facility in Eisenach. Anichkov's account was dismissed at the time as fabrication, yet a 1945 Soviet logistics ledger lists unidentified aero components arriving in Moscow from Czechoslovakia that summer. Technical descriptions from the ledger suggest the assemblies were axial flow turbines with output parameters exceeding those of the Junkers Jumo 004, the standard jet engine of the Me-262. One notation reads, intended for long-range velocity apparatus, speed targets beyond 1,000 km per hour. No such German aircraft was known to exist, and post-war aerospace research files in the West make no mention of this development. In West Germany, a fragment of corroboration surfaced in 1982, when a private estate sale in Stuttgart revealed personal papers belonging to Dr. Klaus Richter, formerly an engineer at Heinkelhirth. Among them was a single carbon copy of a requisition form dated March 12, 1945, authorizing shipment of Gerät V prototypes from Eisenach to Gorlitz for special evacuation under Nachtfracht protocol. Richter's notes in the margin reference stator ring instability at altitude, a problem known to plague high-performance turbines even in post-war designs. Efforts to locate the final resting place of the Nachtfracht train have been sporadic and largely unsuccessful. In 1994, a Czech archaeological team investigated a disused tunnel near Hrastovce after ground-penetrating radar suggested metallic anomalies beneath a collapsed section. The Ministry of Defense abruptly halted the dig after 2 days, citing unexploded ordnance risk. Independent observers reported the site was later sealed with reinforced concrete. What remains in the record are only fragments, a chain of logistics orders with missing pages, aerial photographs with unexplained annotations, and contradictory testimonies from surviving railway workers. No verified physical components from Gerät V have ever surfaced in the West. The only direct description of the cargo comes from Mahler's second debriefing by U.S. counterintelligence corps officers on July 14, 1945. Under questioning, he admitted to glimpsing one of the crates during a refueling stop. The interior contained a cylindrical assembly nearly 4 meters long, with copper wiring coiled tightly around a central drum. Mahler recalled a faint chemical odor, like heated phenol. The crate was lined with a strange composite material he described as hard as glass but light in weight. He did not know the material's name. Post-war NATO intelligence analysts have speculated that Gerät V may have been part of an unrealized high-speed reconnaissance platform, possibly unmanned, intended to overfly Allied territory without interception. If so, it would represent one of the most advanced German aeronautical designs never documented in Allied technical intelligence reports. The absence of any surviving blueprints or full-scale prototypes only deepens the mystery. The last known reference to Nachtfracht in official records is a brief, handwritten note in a 1946 OSS field report, now held at the U.S. National Archives. It reads simply, "Cargo secured by Russians, train destroyed, engineer missing." No further follow-up appears in the file. Of the 40 SS personnel assigned to the escort, none were ever accounted for in post-war trials or POW lists. Whether they perished during the interception, were absorbed into Soviet custody, or disappeared under assumed identities remains unknown. Their absence from records is as deliberate and complete as the erasure of the train itself. 70 years on, Nachtfracht exists only as an intersection of rumor, partial documentation, and the occasional unguarded remark from those who were there. Whatever Gerät V was, turbine, weapon, or something between, the operation that carried it into the forests of Bohemia ensured it would vanish not just from the battlefield, but from history itself. On February 14, 1946, a memorandum stamped, "Most Secret," crossed the desk of Brigadier Colin C. Gubbins, former head of the Special Operations Executive. It had arrived from the War Office's Department of Military Intelligence, MI9, and carried the peculiar designation Shade 12. The attached orders authorized a joint operation with a recently formed Strategic Services Unit, the OSS transitional successor, tasked with entering the Soviet-controlled ruins of Königsberg, East Prussia. The stated objective, secure a German naval scientist, Dr. Friedrich Adler, believed to have developed a submarine hull with near-zero radar signature. Königsberg in February 1946 was a gutted carcass of a city, its medieval core reduced to rubble by Allied bombing and Soviet artillery. The Red Army's occupation forces, under the command of General Ivan Bagramyan, kept the port under strict control. Civilians were forcibly relocated, German military prisoners were dispatched to labor camps, and unauthorized foreign presence was prohibited. Yet Shade 12 was authorized to bypass normal diplomatic channels. The memorandum contains an explicit warning: field teams are not to engage Soviet personnel unless mission compromise is unavoidable. The operation assembled in Hamburg under the guise of a Royal Engineers Survey Detachment. Leading the MI6 component was Captain Robert W. Halley, a veteran of Baltic infiltration missions during the war. The U.S. element was headed by Lieutenant Frank M. Howard, formerly of OSS Maritime Unit 3. Both carried forged credentials identifying them as members of the Allied Control Commission for Germany. On February 19, the Shade 12 team, 6 men in total, departed by truck to the Polish port of Gdynia, where they boarded the trawler SS Waldorf. The vessel had been loaned from a Hamburg shipping company with discreet ties to British naval intelligence. Sailing under a neutral Danish flag, the Waldorf entered Königsberg's harbor under pretense of delivering fishing gear to Soviet authorities for Baltic stock replenishment. The target, Dr. Adler, was last confirmed at a Kriegsmarine research facility in Palo, modern Baltiisk, in April 1945, where Projekt Donnerkeil was underway. According to a surviving fragment of a 1945 U-boat maintenance log recovered in Kiel, experimental hull sections, constructed from layered synthetic resin and coated with a ferrite compound, had been mounted to the Type XXI submarine U-2541 for trials. Test results suggested an unprecedented reduction in radar return, rendering the vessel almost invisible to Allied coastal surveillance. Local informants in Königsberg told Halley's team that Adler had been seen 3 months earlier working under Soviet guard near the port's drydock complex. The informants, themselves former German dockworkers awaiting relocation orders, claimed Adler had been forced to oversee the dismantling of his own laboratory. The first phase of Shade 12 went according to plan. On February 22, Halley and Howard located a civilian ledger in the harbor master's office showing an unusual shipment of machinery components scheduled for rail transfer eastward toward Leningrad. The date of departure, February 24, gave the team less than 48 hours to intercept Adler before he disappeared into the Soviet interior. The last recorded contact from Shade 12 came at 3:17 on February 24. A shortwave burst transmission, later decoded by Bletchley Park, read simply, "Target located, proceeding to rail yard, extraction probable, stand by." The message ended with a string of 6 numerals, November 6, 72. No further transmissions were received. At 3:24, a second signal attempted connection but was unreadable, jammed by an untraceable source. What followed remains officially undocumented. Soviet records from the Baltic Fleet Command, reviewed after 1991, make no mention of British or American operatives detained in Königsberg during that week. However, a classified Soviet Navy memorandum dated March 1, 1946 refers obliquely to recovered foreign material and personnel, in association with the codeword Volna, 73. Whether Volna, 73 pertains to Shade 12 has never been proven. In 1958, a retired MI6 signals officer named Peter Ingram testified in a closed parliamentary session that the numerals November 672 were not random. According to Ingram, they matched the coordinates of a disused submarine pen in the Pregel River estuary, one of several Kriegsmarine structures the Soviets had yet to demolish. Ingram claimed a post-war aerial reconnaissance flight in 1947 captured images of this pen with fresh structural damage, as though an explosion had occurred inside. Dr. Adler's name reappears only once more in historical record, a heavily censored Soviet patent application from 1954 for a submersible vessel with electromagnetic absorption structure, credited to F.A. as co-inventor. Western analysts concluded that the Soviets had successfully incorporated elements of Seescharten into their own submarine designs. Of the 6 men in Shade 12, none returned to Allied territory. Halley and Howard were posthumously listed as missing, presumed dead, occupied zone in 1947. Their families received no remains, no effects, and no official explanation. The War Office closed the Shade 12 file in 1951, sealing its contents for 75 years. Yet fragments continued to surface. In 1973, a Polish scrap dealer uncovered a corroded metal case while dredging near Baltiisk. Inside was a waterproofed pouch containing 3 Mi-6 cipher pads and a faded photograph of a partially dismantled Type XXI submarine hull. A notation on the back of the photo, in Halley's handwriting, read, "Material intact, Soviets unaware, February 24, 46. The case was confiscated by local authorities. Its current location is unknown. Today, the coordinates November 6, 72 mark only a stretch of silted shoreline where the Pregel meets the Baltic. The submarine pen is gone, erased by redevelopment. The Soviets, and later the Russian Federation, have denied any knowledge of a joint Allied incursion in Königsberg in 1946. Without surviving witnesses or unsealed files, Shade 12 remains a silent chapter in the uneasy intelligence war that began before the Cold War was even named. On August 4, 1952, a warehouse fire erupted in the industrial district of Praga, Warsaw, consuming what appeared to be Soviet military storage facilities. Polish civil defense responders arrived to find the building already cordoned off by armed officers of the Ministry of Public Security, UB. The blaze was controlled within 2 hours, but the inventory was destroyed, except for several warped metal film canisters, later retrieved from the debris by a UB officer named Major Jerzy Nowicki. These reels, stamped with Wehrmacht inventory codes, had been in storage since the end of the war. The canisters were marked in German, Eigentum, Heeresversuchsanstalt Silesia, ABT, Energieübertragung. Nowicki, who reportedly viewed portions of the film before it was seized, described black and white footage of uniformed officers standing beside a massive parabolic apparatus mounted on a swiveling base. Operators in field caps adjusted control panels while, in the background, metal pylons rose against a winter sky. At intervals, the dish emitted a burst of invisible energy that caused nearby arc lamps to flicker and go dark. The label on one reel read simply, Projekt Donnerkeil, Versuch 14. Soviet forces had seized the Heeresversuchsanstalt, Army Research Station, in Lower Silesia in May 1945. The facility, officially devoted to communications research, was in reality a testing ground for advanced electromagnetic transmission systems. A surviving 1944 requisition form from the facility, recovered decades later from a scrap paper lot in Wrocław, lists high-capacity impulse generators and large-format dielectric arrays among its ordered items, materials consistent with high-energy pulse research. A declassified but heavily redacted 1953 KGB technical memorandum, discovered in the 1990s in Moscow's Special Archive, refers to Donnerkeil as a directed electromagnetic emission apparatus with destructive potential against electrical and electronic systems. One section warns that deployment against urban grids would render communications, transportation, and defensive installations inoperable in a matter of seconds. The same document notes that components were unfit for continuous operation due to catastrophic overheating in emitter waveguides. Polish security records indicate the reels were shipped to the USSR within 48 hours of the warehouse fire. They were logged at a Soviet facility in Kaliningrad under the cover designation A-12 photographic material. No further reference to them appears in open archives. Unconfirmed accounts from former Soviet technical officers suggest that Donnerkeil was a continuation of German wartime research into high-energy radio frequency weapons, an area the Allies largely overlooked in the chaos of 1945. According to one such account, field trials were conducted in late 1944 near the town of Zabkowislaski, where a mobile emitter dish reportedly disabled a convoy of test vehicles at a range of 300 meters. The vehicles, examined afterward, showed no physical damage, only burned wiring and fused ignition coils. Western intelligence became aware of Donnerkeil through a single intercepted telex in 1955 between two Soviet engineering bureaus, in which DNRKL was mentioned alongside specifications for short-duration high-voltage capacitive banks. The CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence assessed the technology as impractical for battlefield use in current form, but of considerable sabotage potential against fixed infrastructure. Major Nowicki, the original witness to the reels, was reassigned to a rural administrative post in 1954 and retired under unclear circumstances. In an unverified statement to a Polish émigré journalist in 1967, he claimed one reel had shown a night test in which the dish was aimed at a cluster of wooden buildings fitted with electric lighting. Moments after the dish discharged, all lights failed and a faint haze appeared over the rooftops. When power was restored minutes later, the bulbs glowed faintly and then burst in rapid succession. Attempts to trace the physical remnants of Donnerkeil have met with dead ends. The Heeresversuchsanstalt site itself was leveled by Soviet engineers in the late 1940s. No foundation remains visible. Satellite imagery from the 1970s shows the area converted into an armored vehicle training ground. In 1994, a former GRU archivist named Sergei Volkov provided researchers with what he claimed was a surviving still frame from one of the reels. The image depicts 4 German officers beside the parabolic dish, one holding a clipboard with the date, December 17, 1944, visible. Behind them, a truck bears the unit marking Nachrichten Abteilung 305, a signals unit attached to Army Group Center. Experts could not confirm the authenticity of the frame, but the grain and film stock matched late-war AGFA types. Theories regarding the ultimate fate of Donnerkeil range from its incorporation into early Soviet electronic warfare programs to its dismantling after proving too unstable for sustained use. What remains indisputable is that the device existed in physical form and was tested, filmed, and transported under military guard. Its destruction or concealment was deliberate, thorough, and consistent with post-war Soviet practices of absorbing German technology into classified weapons programs. Today, all that survives in public record are second-hand descriptions, one questionable still image, and a string of vanished witnesses. If Projekt Donnerkeil achieved even a fraction of the disruptive capability its reports suggest, it represented a weapon capable of silencing an entire city without firing a shot, an achievement that may explain why it disappeared into the deepest shadows of the Cold War. On August 21, 1945, 6 days after Japan's formal surrender, a U.S. Navy signals unit at Pearl Harbor intercepted an encrypted transmission on a frequency previously used by the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet. The signal originated from a coastal station near Dalian, Manchuria, then under Japanese control but rapidly falling to Soviet forces. The traffic, sent in the Kaigun Ango No. 5 cipher, was passed to the Navy's cryptanalytic section in Washington for urgent decryption. The contents, finally decoded in late September, outlined a joint Imperial, Wehrmacht operation codenamed Seiron Zeta. The message described the transfer of unspecified special cargo from Manchuria onto a Type I submarine for delivery to South America. The plan involved a rendezvous at sea with a German Type IX-40 U-boat somewhere in the mid-Pacific, after which the combined vessel complement would continue to the Argentine coast under Kriegsmarine Navigational Command. The Japanese source emphasized that the cargo's safe arrival was of strategic importance to post-war contingencies, but no further detail appeared in the intercepted segment. The Type I submarine, tentatively identified as I-402, had been modified late in the war to serve as a tanker and long-range transport. Naval records indicate that she disappeared from Japanese operational logs in early August 1945. Allied naval intelligence listed her as presumed scuttled following the surrender, but this assessment was based solely on the absence of sightings, not on confirmed wreckage. American patrols in the Central Pacific reported no trace of the vessel, yet an Argentine naval intelligence report from May 1947, declassified in 1992, describes a nighttime landing near Mar del Plata involving a vessel of foreign configuration operating without lights. Local fishermen told investigators that 3 low-slung boats ferried elongated, metal-covered containers from the submarine to shore, where they were loaded onto waiting trucks covered in tarpaulin. Witnesses recalled that some of the crew spoke in a German dialect, while others conversed in Japanese. The Argentine report, stamped "Strictement Confidential," notes that the convoy headed inland toward the Pampas region under the escort of unmarked military-style vehicles. The route was not recorded, and the trucks were never intercepted. Weeks later, an informant in Buenos Aires reported that German émigrés with wartime military backgrounds had arrived in the city's western suburbs, traveling under false passports issued in Paraguay. Separate evidence emerged in 1953, when a defector from the Kriegsmarine's wartime logistics branch told West German intelligence that Seiron Zeta had been planned as early as February 1945. According to his account, the cargo comprised high-density materials and precision assemblies, removed from a research facility in Saxony in April and flown to Japan aboard long-range transport aircraft via Manchuria. The Germans, facing imminent defeat, sought to preserve specific technologies by transferring them to sympathetic regimes in South America. The U.S. Navy's post-war search for I-402 was inconclusive. In 1958, divers surveying a sunken wreck off Mindoro, Philippines, found a submarine hull matching Type I dimensions but bearing no identification plates. The remains were heavily corroded, and no cargo was found aboard. Some analysts believe this was an intentional decoy scuttled to mislead Allied recovery efforts. In 1978, the Argentine journalist Ricardo Suarez published claims that sealed crates resembling torpedo canisters were secretly transported in 1945 to an estate in the Córdoba province, property of a known wartime Nazi sympathizer. Suarez alleged that these containers were later moved again in the early 1950s during heightened U.S. pressure on Perón's government. His sources, all anonymous, claimed the contents were machines, not weapons, requiring specialized climate control. Naval historians attempting to verify Seiron Zeta have been stymied by missing records. Japanese wartime shipping logs for August 1945 are incomplete, and Kriegsmarine U-boat war diaries for several Type IX-40 submarines operating in the Pacific remain unaccounted for. British Admiralty files on joint Axis naval operations in the Far East are closed until at least 2035. One of the few tangible artifacts possibly linked to the operation surfaced in 1991, when a retired Argentine naval officer sold a brass bulkhead plate to a private collector in Montevideo. The plate bore Japanese kanji consistent with Type B1 submarine construction, alongside faint stenciled numbers in the German DIN format. The collector, aware of its potential significance, refused to disclose the seller's name. Officially, Seiron Zeta is treated as an unverified post-war rumor, an amalgamation of intercepted signals, unexplained sightings, and opportunistic conspiracy theories. Yet the convergence of independent accounts, separated by decades and geography, has kept the story alive among naval researchers. The unanswered question is not only whether I-402 reached South America, but also what cargo was deemed important enough for the crumbling Axis powers to risk one final, transoceanic rendezvous in the dying days of the war. In October 1961, during the construction of a new runway at Baranovichi Air Base in the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, a work crew operating a pneumatic drill struck reinforced concrete beneath the soil. Further excavation revealed a sealed vault roughly 4 meters deep, its entrance blocked by a welded steel plate. The site supervisor notified the base's security detachment, and within hours the area was encircled by GRU personnel who ordered all civilian workers to leave. When the plate was removed, soldiers found a series of wooden crates, each stenciled with the Luftwaffe's Black Eagle insignia and a serial number beginning with KG 200, the designation of the Luftwaffe's clandestine long-range operations wing. Alongside the crates lay a water-damaged logbook bearing the signature of Oberst Hans Rudiger, a senior KG 200 officer known to have overseen special missions from late 1944 until the war's end. The inventory inside the logbook listed components described as Fluggerät Typ IX-Schwan, Zerlegt, suggesting dismantled sections of an aircraft. The term Schwan, swan in German, appears nowhere else in surviving Luftwaffe development files. Several items were marked Stufe 3, Hochgeheim, Stage 3, Top Secret, a classification reserved for the Reich Air Ministry's most sensitive projects. Witnesses recalled that the crates contained fuselage panels of an unfamiliar composite material, lightweight yet rigid, unlike the duralumin commonly used during the period. One box held a conical nose assembly with internal mountings for what appeared to be precision optical equipment. Another contained a cylindrical housing with fine brass tubing coiled around its inner surface, possibly part of an advanced propulsion or cooling system. The workers handling the material were ordered not to speak of it. Within 48 hours, the contents of the vault were removed under heavy guard and transported by truck convoy toward Minsk. According to a declassified Soviet Air Force movement log, 2 Antonov and 12 transports departed Minsk on October 23 carrying engineering cargo, special handling, to a facility in Zhukovsky, near Moscow. The runway at Baranovichi was completed over the now empty vault, erasing physical access to the site. Western intelligence learned of the find indirectly. In 1965, a Polish Air Force officer visiting Baranovichi overheard base personnel referring to the German Swan plane recovered during the runway works. His report, smuggled to West Berlin, reached the CIA but lacked corroborating evidence. Efforts to locate matching German project records failed. The files of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium for 1945 were already known to have been purged or captured by the Soviets. In 1989, following the political changes in Eastern Europe, a former GRU logistics officer named Alexei Morozov claimed in an interview that Typ IX-Schwan was an experimental high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft capable of sustained flight above 20,000 meters, beyond the effective range of most wartime interceptors. Morozov stated that the design incorporated hybrid propulsion, a piston engine for climb and an early form of rocket assist for brief, high-speed dashes over target zones. The purpose, he claimed, was photographic intelligence deep into Allied airspace. Morozov alleged that the incomplete Schwan prototype had been moved east from Königsberg in early 1945, concealed in rail cargo marked as agricultural equipment, and eventually hidden in Belarus as the Red Army advanced. The Baranovichi vault, he said, had been deliberately buried under false foundations in 1946, when the Soviets decided to halt work due to materials instability at altitude. Skeptics point out that no photographs of the aircraft have surfaced, and the physical evidence is entirely in Soviet custody, if it still exists. Yet certain anomalies remain. A 1944 kilograms 200 mission roster includes a blank entry for an experimental transfer from Rechlin airfield to an unspecified location. Luftwaffe requisition logs from January 1945 show unusual orders for high-temperature alloys and precision optical glass. And Soviet aerospace patents filed in the 1950s describe composite materials strikingly similar to those reportedly used in Schwan's fuselage panels. The location of the recovered components is unknown. Some researchers believe they were studied and then cannibalized for early Soviet reconnaissance aircraft designs. Others suggest the remains were destroyed to conceal the project's existence altogether. An American U-2 reconnaissance photograph from November 1961, 2 weeks after the Baranovichi discovery, shows fresh tarmac laid over a small section of the runway with an oddly raised contour, consistent with a buried structure. Whether beneath that mound lies the original vault or merely its sealed remains is a question no one in authority has answered. The Typ IX-Schwan file, if it exists in Soviet or Russian archives, has never been declassified. Without it, the episode rests on fragments, an abandoned logbook, a few eyewitness accounts, and the enduring rumor of a wartime aircraft so advanced that even in the 1960s, its components were spirited away as if they were still militarily relevant. Some truths do not fade, they are smothered. But smothering is not the same as killing. In forgotten tunnels and locked cabinets, the artifacts wait, like loaded weapons without triggers, silent until someone finds the courage, or the greed, to reach for them. And when they do, the past will breathe again, cold and heavy, as if it had been holding its breath all along.